Chapter 8. Intuition. In creating a model or structure for the purpose of analysis, there can be no better instrument than the intellect. I have drawn this picture of the structure of the human mind and the levels of human awareness in such a way that it will appeal to your intellect. The fact that I have divided the mind into functions and awareness, into different levels and so on, immediately won the approval of your intellect. If I had not broken the subjects into sections and categories, you would have rejected the whole theory of intuition. All that has been said so far could never have been said without the use of human intellect. I would have had no capacity to communicate with you. Therefore, up to a certain point, and I stress only a certain point, intellect is a very useful instrument. But if we feel that we can attain the highest knowledge available through the exclusive use of the intellectual process, we will be making a great mistake. Therefore, what I am suggesting is that, in addition to using intellect and reason, we should also use our capacity to know things intuitively. We should not let intellect get in the way of our use of this higher faculty available in human consciousness. Therefore, the best contribution that intellect can make to the process of acquiring knowledge is to know and observe its limitations. This would be a great contribution and will relieve the individual of a great deal of frustration and anxiety. There is no other faculty in the entire scope of human consciousness that can perform this service except the intellect. To understand this is to have a great insight, to realize that any event or experience taking place beyond the limits of the time-space causality complex is inaccessible to the human intellect. Try to think about what occurs before it begins, that takes place nowhere, which has not been caused by anything, and the intellect will collapse. The moment any experience in consciousness is taken out of the time-space causality sequence, the intellect cannot comprehend it, no matter how much effort is made. The only problem is that the intellect itself has not been trained to automatically shut itself down. The intellect will not automatically perform this function unless it has been properly trained and sharpened. Therefore, even for the intellect to perform this service, it will need to be developed to a very great extent. So I am not condemning the use of the intellect, because it must be developed to a point where we can discover its limitations, thereby enabling us to go beyond logic and reasoning into the realms of knowledge that have been denied the logicians. This limitation of the intellect keeps us at a level of awareness where we cannot see truth. No truth can ever come out of logic, because no experience is derived from thinking. With intellect, you can only think about the truth. You cannot experience the truth. But logic and intellect can be a good servant. When you've attained a certain experience, intellect can help explain it. Logic can help make it clear. But that is all. The greatest contribution that intellect can make to the growth of human knowledge is to discover this limitation, to discover that it can never know the truth, and that it cannot transcend and grasp any experience which lies beyond time, space, and causation. Once this is fully understood, the intellect can then be persuaded to step aside and let the higher faculty of consciousness, intuition, function. It is not necessary to destroy the intellect. The human mind, consisting principally of this intellectual process, need not be destroyed. Unfortunately, you will find many people who are interested in developing higher levels of human awareness, who try to destroy their minds, and some of them have succeeded. There are madhouses full of this kind of people. But look at the blunder that these people are committing. Who is saying that the mind is terrible? What, in consciousness, is making this statement? That the mind is our enemy. that the mind is the only obstacle standing in the way of our enlightenment, and so on. What is making these claims? Destroy this mind, and you will attain the highest levels of awareness. Who is saying all this? It is the mind itself, which says all these things. They are trying to use the mind to destroy itself. Look at the absurdity of it all. No wonder, then, that they go mad. This is madness. It is not necessary to destroy the mind, but it is necessary to understand the nature of the mind, to understand that it has its own limitations. Therefore, you must take the level of the intellect to a point of development where it realizes that it can go this far and no further. Then alone will the intellect step aside and allow us to use the higher faculty of intuition arising from the soul of man. In fact, it has been said that the human mind is the greatest enemy of man, only as long as it has not been fully understood. When the intellect has been properly trained to perform its functions in human awareness, this same mind becomes man's best friend. Therefore, in the spiritual development of man towards the attainment of higher levels of awareness, the human mind has been the greatest obstruction when not understood and trained. When we fully understand its legitimate function, it becomes man's greatest aid in the journey to higher levels of human awareness. The only problem is in training it. If we deliberately trained the mind, along with training ourselves in the use of the intuitive process, we would greatly add to the scope and accuracy of human knowledge. Today, one of the greatest drawbacks in our society and in our human relationships is that we are beset with doubts. Nothing is certain. No one knows anything for sure. Everyone is simply groping in the darkness, and because of this uncertainty and doubt, great fear and skepticism is created in the minds of men. This fear and suspicion breeds hatred and anger. We are constantly victimized by jealousy, frustration, lack of trust, and so many other emotional and psychological diseases of the mind. People have become schizophrenic, split, divided. Our entire society is becoming mentally ill. This is due largely to the element of doubt which permeates our minds. We are never really sure about the other person, about our wives or our husbands, about our boss or our neighbor, and so on. We are never sure of what they will do, of what they are thinking, and so on. All our fears, our lack of trust and confidence, and conflict in personalities occur because of this element of doubt which is present in the human mind. This doubt and lack of knowledge is arising from one thing, and one thing only, the excessive use of the intellect. The more we reason, the more doubts we create in the mind. The more we think about a problem, the more confused we become. The mind becomes crowded with so much information and so many alternatives that lack of certainty and confusion is bound to occur. It is a very strange thing to notice. The intellectual process upon which we rely so much, upon which we bestow such a claim, this process of reasoning and use of logic leads only to more confusion and uncertainty. It generates so many possibilities that we become totally confused. We are, then, not able to decide what to do, and therefore can do nothing but suffer. The excessive use of the intellect, especially with regard to our human relations, has led to a lack of faith and trust in each other, lack of love, greater conflict in society, and violence in general. It is, therefore, the excessive use of the intellect which is causing all our problems in society as well as in our personal lives. I am suggesting that, in addition to the use of logic and the intellectual processes, we also use our faculty of intuition, The intuitive process will, in turn, generate total and certain knowledge, which will enable us to banish these problems of jealousy, hatred, fear, violence, and so on, first from our personal relationships, and then from society as a whole. The knowledge of the goodness of man will be brought to us through this use of intuition. It will enable us to function from a much higher consciousness, love. Love is the greatest mystery that there can be. It can be lived, but it cannot be intellectually known. It can be tasted, experienced, but cannot be understood. It is something which goes far beyond logic and reason, something which surpasses all understanding. Love is the highest possible experience available to human consciousness. This experience of love is being blocked out because of the excessive use of logic and reasoning. Therefore, worldwide training and development of the intuitive faculty in human consciousness is extremely important and necessary. We should not banish reason and the use of intellect altogether, but we should learn to use them properly and only when and where they are required. We should not supplant them into areas of human existence where their efficiency is minimized or altogether inadequate. Intellect and reasoning should not be used in the areas of love, human understanding, and togetherness. That is in the realms beyond logic and reason. All these exercises in the development of awareness lead to the experience of oneness and love. This total awareness, which is the experience of oneness, is the highest experience which we can visualize or know in terms of the growth of human awareness. We have had problems in the development of human awareness because we have had problems in understanding our own self. When we are able to understand our own self, we are automatically, with no further effort, without any other mechanics, able to develop higher awareness and experience of love. The more we use the mind, the more we see the difference between ourselves. Different clothes, different bodies, different races, different languages, different religions, and so on. The intellect always divides people into different categories, the educated and the uneducated, the religious and the sinner, the moral and the immoral. The pattern is always the same. The intellect goes on dividing people into differences. Then we claim to belong to one of these so-called higher categories. That way we can pretend to be better than others. All these differences between us are being created by the intellect, by the mind. Intuition, the sole faculty in human consciousness, notices only one thing, the oneness of consciousness. It notices the same consciousness, the same light of consciousness that is shining in all of us. The awareness of this common consciousness comes through the deliberate use of our intuition. Therefore, when we talk about the development of awareness to the level of the soul, the spiritual level, we are not merely speaking of some abstract level of consciousness. We are talking of the development of one's intuition in order to see the oneness existing among all human beings. This realization is called love, and it can be experienced, at will, by transcending the intellectual processes going on in the mind. What happens when we transcend the intellectual process? When we do so, instead of approaching anyone or any situation full of doubts, we approach through love, based on the understanding that he or she is the same thing that I am, that in them is operating at the same consciousness as in me. My trust will beget his trust, my love will beget his love. We are all basically loving creatures because we are made of love. This must be remembered as much as possible. You can try this experiment today. No one needs to change his name, lifestyle, and so on. We need love. All that we are inwardly concerned with is love. But when we function through the process of reasoning, logic, and an excessive use of the intellect, we trigger the mind response in other people. When we speak with or through the intellect, with only the mind, we create doubt in the mind of the other person. Then he or she becomes unsure of our motives, doubts whether we are sincere and whether we really mean what we say, and so on. Our intellect will trigger doubt and fear in the other person's mind. When we act out of the ignorance of the sameness of human consciousness, the other person picks up our uncertainty and himself responds with doubt. Then come fear, tension, and lack of knowledge of each other, which only lead to further misunderstanding. Just replace this whole phenomenon with the language and act of love and trust. Act and speak from the realization that the other person is the same as you are, the same soul, the same consciousness made by the same Creator. We are a part of the same thing. We are able to solve all of the problems we are having in our human relationships by remembering that consciousness, God, and love are in everyone. When this oneness can be remembered all the time, we will have no more problems. Our life will become a melody of tremendous harmony, a festival, a celebration. All our tensions and anxieties will dissolve, and friction among ourselves will disappear. Our life then becomes like music, a great symphony of joy, love, and happiness.